Welcome back to our panel. Former National MP Dan Bedouin, economist Brad Olsen and Dr Lara Greaves from Auckland University. On the topic list right now, the Prime Minister's trip to Asia. Lara, first trip, 2 years, face-to-face diplomacy, big debate about inflation back at home. Was it a success or was it overshadowed?
I would say it was fairly a success. So at some point, the Prime Minister and others had to kick off their sort of diplomacy and get back into it. But it couldn't look like a party because currently there are a lot of, especially rural communities, battling COVID, people who are self-isolating, people who are suffering. So you can't then make it some big glamorous trip. It's got to be something understated. And I think that struck a pretty good balance there.
One of the enduring images, Brad, was the dancing kiwi fruit behind the Prime Minister at a Zespri event.
Such a meme.
So it's just amazing. But it's also, you know, she's there to entice people back here and to say that we're open for business. I mean, how important are Singapore and Japan to us?
Oh, very important. I mean, our fifth and fourth biggest trading partners. It's critically important that we get back out there because we know that everyone else is starting to do the same. New Zealand is in a good position through COVID, how we're perceived. I think we've really got to capitalise on that. And going to Asia first, I think, is critical because that really is part of our, major core trading partners, but also our backyard. We've got to keep that working. But for me, I think this trip, sort of how it went, was quite indicative of how New Zealand is going to reopen to the world. The first stage of the trip, a little bit soft, didn't sort of go all that great, a few hiccups, no questions. You get to the Japan leg, that was quite exciting, you had a lot more, there were the viral videos, there was a lot of energy. So I think that's, to me, is very indicative. I think New Zealand is going to face a slow path forward, but it will ramp
Sort of like our borders, really, a soft opening, a bit more exciting. But it wasn't just about trade, Dan, it was also about establishing this security agreement with Japan. Does that sort of symbolise how New Zealand is treading now? Is it being softly away from China and going elsewhere?
Well, look, there's certainly concerns with respect to China in the Indo-Pacific region. So, Japan is a really important trading partner, but an important geopolitical partner, making sure we put America at the heart and centre of making sure they're in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think it's important to what these guys were saying before. I think it's great to see the Prime Minister out there, good for making sure international tourists can come to New Zealand, our importers, exporters. As a Kiwi that's lived overseas, it gives me a sense of pride when you see your Prime Minister of any stripe actually.
We're here debating inflation and cost of living, but she's there giving interviews to BBC World and the Japanese media. So she really still has a big presence on the international stage, doesn't she?
Yeah, so we talk about that idea of political capital at home, but she's got a lot of political capital internationally. Like, I just spent all of the week Zooming Europe for some political scientists over there on a conference, and they all know her. Yeah. They all know a lot about her. They know our COVID story. Like, we've got that sort of international reputation. And so that's kind of really an interesting and exciting thing in terms of diplomacy now for Ardern and for New Zealand more generally, is using that political capital and kind of seeing what she does next, like A, for the country, but B, for her and her career, because she's going to finish being PM sometime in her 40s.
All right, so you're saying she's got a little political capital to spend on the international stage. Are you predicting somewhere she's going to go? No,
I'm just saying potentially, but that actually does give us, New Zealand likes to think that we're a big hitter on foreign policy, or we punch above our weight, it's one of those myths. But potentially here Ardern does.
Right.
We are a little bit more than we maybe would normally.
Right, so it might be true for once.
I mean, I think that's important, though, as well, that if we've got capital, that we use it, because realistically we're now seeing for both in Asia but also in Europe that increasingly your security and your economic allegiances and how those things play out are becoming inextricably linked. I mean, you look at how Europe and Russia are going. Yes, there's huge sanctions, but they're still buying a lot of fuel and oil and gas. And increasingly in Asia, we're going to have to figure out how we best work with what is a major trading partner in China, but also against those sort of security concerns that continue to bubble up.
Let's talk about security concerns in our backyard. Dan, we'll come to you. So the Solomon Islands and China, as we know, signed their security deal while the PM was in Asia. Was that sort of an inconvenient time for her, that this is being done in the backyard and she's not here?
Oh, I think it was going to be signed anyway. I don't think there was any indicative reason why it was done at that point, but certainly there's been a lot of action. I know the US officials have been to the Solomons just, I think, in the last day. Australia's been there as well, and I'm sure New Zealand needs to continue to express our displeasure at the signing of the agreement, but hey, ultimately they're a sovereign country, they can do what they want.
And that is a point. We've got a statement from their foreign minister, and which says, I ask all our neighbours, friends and partners, is that us, to respect the sovereign interests of Solomon Islands on the assurance the decision will not adversely impact or undermine peace and harmony of our region. So they're saying, basically, Lara, butt out.
Well, yeah, we have to balance that sort of tuakana-taina relationship we have with the Pacific Islands with not treating them like toddlers, because that's a bit paternalistic and patronising.
Yep.
And I'd say generally this has been much worse for Scott Morrison on the campaign trail this week.
Oh, right, OK. We don't have much of an economic relationship with Solomon Islands, but maybe we should have had.
Well, and I think that sort of comes to the issue, right? I mean, you've got to ask, why did the Solomons say, well, obviously New Zealand and Australia aren't doing enough for us, we're going to look elsewhere? So part of that really does reflect that New Zealand has got to be very concentrated on our own backyard, because increasingly, you know, this is an economic, this is a security challenge that New Zealand is going to face. In my mind, we know that we've got very, very strong relations in the Pacific, but they're often obviously not strong enough at the moment to make us top of the list. And increasingly, as we look to go forward, as you see China start to expand, as you're seeing the UK, but also the US also rethinking their relations in the Pacific, we've got to make ourselves, along with our partners in Australia, be very much the top of the list when Pacific Island nations are looking around. And at the moment, it's quite clear that we're not.
Yeah, just to wrap up, Dan, I mean, we did have Winston Peters, Foreign Minister, then with the Pacific Reset, and Nanaia Mahuta has been focusing on it as well, but not enough? Or do we need to do more?
Look, I think at this juncture, it's really important to work with our allies. You know, Solomon Islands can do what they want, but if they find themselves increasingly under pressure from their surrounding neighbours, then they may consider what they're actually going to do. But, you know, to the point that was made, I mean, I think China was driving a lot of this agreement, so we need to look more strategically around why is China wanting that presence here, and actually what are we going to do about that?
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you to our panel, Dan Bidwell, Brett Olson and Dr. Lara Greaves.